Yo, what is going on? We are back with another episode of the Unsilent Church podcast. New year, new episode.
For sure.
We got the team in the building. Pastor V, what up?
Hey, man.
Obu.
What's happening?
What's happening?
What it is.
What it is. What it ain't. What it do.
I mean,
what it could be.
You adding a bunch
what
of
it won't be.
You adding a bunch of yos.
I mean, you know.
That's a nice rhythm there.
Yeah, man, you know what I'm trying to, hey, new year, new episode.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying?
I'm with it.
Well, with that said, man, we got a special conversation that we're going to be having. Pastor V, start us off, man.
Yeah. So first topic today is a reel that a bunch of us saw. And that sort of speaks to something that is, can we say, endemic, that just sort of almost seems a normal part of church today. And sort of this idea of the church as business, particularly the ways in which church and how we do church and how we just all the different type of ministries, church, but even particularly the worship services are now sort of run as productions, as experiences, as almost entertainment experiences for us to sort of receive and consume. So we'll hopefully have this clip in the description, but a quick description of it. In this reel, you see basically the church's production manager managing the different cameras for the, I'm assuming the streaming, the video.
Yeah, she's like a production director. So if you're ever behind the scenes, like you could say NBA, any major production, they have someone in the back calling every camera. So every time you're watching TV and you just see the scenes change, somebody is in the back telling someone to switch to all the different cameras. So sometimes they might have, dozens of cameras, and someone is directing them at very specific times to switch to the different shots and to the different angles. And someone's calling all those. So somebody's calling shots, literally.
Yeah. So what was interesting about this is for a church worship service. This person very sort of passionately, enthusiastically is saying, camera 2, camera 3, zoom in, camera 3. Like it's just try to capture this person in this real huge moment of singing,
passion.
Oh yeah, let's capture this, let's bring this. I think she's even directing the people on the stage saying, hey, if I remember this, was
I'm
that
not
right?
sure if she was directing the people on the stage, but I think, it's hard because part of it is like you just respect, like she's having a good time.
Yeah.
And she's like, I do this in the back when I'm just like on live stream. I'm just like, I'm in the back and Crystal might have been like singing a song. I'm halfway in tears and still like doing the switching. But then do you think about that at scale and it's someone who's like the worship, vibing, doing all the things while also trying to capture like the perfect moment so that a viewer, sees this sort of curated experience.
Yeah, it felt like watching a major televised production. Right?
Yeah, it'd be like watching
the Oscars or
take
concert
any concert on tour. They're gonna have probably the same number of cameras, if not more, and someone in the back calling all these shots for however many people that they might be broadcasting this to. So Taylor Swift is on tour. And again, in certain cases, you're not going to have all that, but like, take like Beyonce's Homecoming special on Netflix.
Perfect example.
And all the different cameras that are there. Like that was something
in at different points, the way it swirled
exactly
around.
Like that's a produced show with the intent that, hey, there are going to be a lot of people viewing this who aren't here specifically. So there are cameras in specific places.
Budget, I'm sure too.
Yeah. So you're budgeting for all that and somebody's in the back making sure like, okay, and they're live editing. It's a much more challenging.
Just as an estimate, like how much you think budget wise that would cost?
You talking about the Beyonce thing?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Oh. They backed up the truck for that. All the bills in there.
They backing up some trucks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I know smaller artists and $1 million is cheap.
Wow.
That's an artist that's big, nowhere near as big as Beyonce.
Sure.
And they're putting on shows that are like $1 million.
Yeah. Wow.
To put on.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So the question here is, how do we feel about that type of aesthetic approach for a church worship service?
I think that's the big question is that what worship Like, when did worship become that?
Yeah.
I think is the big. We're in 2025, so it's like, okay, at the time of this recording, obviously there's technology, there's a lot of things going on. I think when I saw that, I just go, man, I'm totally vibing with her. But then there's another side of me that goes, what has worship become?
Yeah.
And there's a degree where, like, the people that go on that stage, it's just like,
Sure.
Are you performing? Are you?
Is it worship?
Is it work? Like, what is it turned in? What is it turned into that? Like, what?
Well, what I'm struck by too, to do that well, you have to sort of decide the worship service. I would argue a worship service like that is geared towards the viewer online, right? It's especially sort of aware of people, not just sort of consuming it live, but in terms of the production of it, the setup of it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's especially tailored because, again, just like going to a concert, the live experience is special.
Yeah, you're right.
Right.
Okay.
It's just, but I would say they are very attentive of the person who. So they're trying to, as much as possible, capture for the viewer what people there live are experiencing. So they're trying to create an online experience, even though you're not. But again, the thought is that what it's supposed like?
Yeah, what I was gonna say was like, well, first off, like, you got to say, like, there's some churches that's already doing that.
That's what we're saying. I think more and more churches are doing that.
More and more churches.
That's the thing. It's more and more. That's becoming that's becoming the North Star.
But I would say that I feel like a lot of people in our viewers, they would see this. They was like, oh well, when COVID happened, that's where you saw this, more. And I would argue, you've seen this way before COVID even happened. So we can't blame. Everybody be trying to blame stuff on COVID. You can't be blaming COVID for everything.
No, this ain't COVID.
So I think there's a historical lineage, if you will, to this production type of thing.
Yeah.
And I wonder.
Arguably,
you're the historian in the room, so like, what's the?
I mean, I would say at least goes back to the Second Great Awakening, right? So this is 19th century, right? So Second Great Awakening is obviously a follow-up to the First Great Awakening, when really there's legitimate revival that happened, I would argue, in the United States in First Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening, it seemed like there was sort of revival happening again, but I would argue the difference in the Second Great Awakening is guys like Charles Finney and others were so eager to sort of have sort of the same thing that happened in First Great Awakening, but even more so. They began
by the use of means is what I remember.
Yeah, they began to realize, hey, there's things we can do in our revival meetings, in our revival worship services,
tactics,
strategies that can help get people to the point of crying at the front of the stage, right, and saying, "I want to believe in Jesus." Yeah, they began to realize there's a way to sort of provoke people's emotions that can sort of get them there. And so you saw sort of Charles very deliberately saying we need to be very intentional about how we produce these revival meetings. So you had something called the anxious bench, where there was sort of that the front row was reserved for people to sort of come down the center aisle and sit on that bench. And they would do music and do everything for however long as possible until they sort of said, yes, if I break down, I want to believe and follow Jesus, right? You said all these sort of different sort of things sort of intentionally said, hey, this is what's going to get people there, which is different from in the past, where it was a sense of, hey, we're going to keep preaching the word, et cetera. And you saw people sort of convicted in that way. This was a sense in which if we keep doing these things, this will happen. And what's interesting is, in the wake of the Second Great Awakening, you do see a difference versus the First Great Awakening. First Great Awakening, after it dies off, people still part of churches involved, et cetera. You don't see that in the Second Great Awakening. You see sort of people, the church membership sort of go back to normal, if I could put it that way. People still going to the taverns, et cetera.
Why do they call it the Second Great Awakening?
Because in the beginning, it was
a mass group of people that made a profession of faith.
Well, there was some legitimate, I think, changes. I mean, it felt, in some ways it's just sort of a naming thing. It felt similar to the First Great Awakening, but I think for those of us who really look at it, it actually was, it was not quite the same as
you didn't see the same effect.
Yeah. Anyway, so to your point, you might say part of American Christianity has very early on realized, oh, there's things we can do to produce a certain effect, and that's sort of maybe the as we kind of consider, what are the pros and cons of this? I think one of the things, especially looking at that clip, you realize if I'm watching something, I'm watching a worship service online, and those kind of camera edits, the zoom ins, all that type of thing, it does naturally provoke something in me.
Well, you
right?
can forget that you're watching.
Yeah.
And I think that's
What do you mean?
to their credit.
What do you mean you can forget you watching?
You just get lost. You get lost in the experience. Again, like when you're watching, I remember going to the movies and seeing the Hillsong movie. And like when they did Oceans,
Wow,
dog,
yeah.
I was like, yo, cuz this is on the movie
You
screen.
got converted again?
Probably.
Is that what happened?
Bruh, I'm telling you, I almost walked down that movie aisle to the front.
He's an ancient bitch.
Bro, I'm trying to tell you, though.
That movie usher was like, whoa, you want more popcorn?
When she hit that note in Oceans, I was like,
Oceans is a great song.
I don't know where I'm at, but this,
Yeah.
and you know how enveloping the sound is in those movie theaters.
So how'd you feel about
You
this?
forget that you're watching.
Yeah.
And so I go, oh, okay, I see, I can see the value of trying to, again, in the name of reach, if you're saying we can produce the experience to reach as many people as possible, right? You know, all the arguments notwithstanding, just for the sake of reach, I can go, yeah, when you produce something really, really well, again, like you watch any concert, you watch like any produced show, you watch Homecoming, you kind of forget that you're there and you just get lost in the music, you get lost in the environment and you're there.
Yeah,
to that end, I go,
That makes sense now, yeah.
you know, yeah, that's great.
Which is good. I appreciate you sort of, I mean, because obviously, I mean, it does matter that like music is in tune, right?
Yes.
That people have sort of, this is sort of an extension of that if someone is sort of experiencing this, whether live or over online, if the camera's all over the place, it's distracting, right? The reverse end, like if it's done well, it does. Would you argue that was an authentic experience that you had? I mean,
Like it doesn't change. Like emotions, the sort of again, whatever happens in a room when, again, like think about people who say like, you know, I go into my quiet place, turn on some music, and then what happens?
Music is.
They're not in the room when that song is being recorded, but the fact that the voice, the instruments, the musicality, the songwriting, like we know how powerful words are, we know how powerful music is, you know, and then to put visuals to all of that in such a way that makes you feel like you're there, right? Now, again, I'm in a theater where the screen is, you know, 30 feet high, however tall these. Again, everything is like larger than life. The sound is all around you. It almost feels like you're in that room together, you know. But that's the intention. Now, the flip side then goes, again, even thinking back to like this idea, like we can produce something by the use of means. It's like the idea of producing some sort of, whether live or online, to say, oh, we can produce this kind of emotional effect, such that people come to a place of profession. I go, that's when I think it becomes a slippery slope.
I think is interesting because like, so in two folds. One, there's not necessarily anything inherently wrong or sinful to be able to produce high quality, doing things with excellence, you know, a worship service. That's not like inherently wrong. But I think it comes back to the motivation and the heart behind why you want to do what you want to do. Why anybody wants to do what they want to do. We have churches. It's interesting. The church planner, you mentioned a movie. One of his planted a church, and it was actually at a movie theater, at actually movie theater. And part of the thought was, you know, a lot of people have an experience at a movie theater, and you know, he kind of wanted to have this perspective of trying to engage people from that, you know, from that angle.
Sure.
We also have churches that are in arenas, like basketball arenas, where they, you know, and again, it's like, that's interesting as well. I do think the danger or concern is it breeds a consumeristic culture of Christians. In other words, if your church is not high quality like X, then like I'm not even going to come to your church. I'm not even going to be a part of it because you don't have X.
This feature.
You don't have
these amenities.
And when I travel globally, when we've all have traveled globally, we know that like whether you have all those features or not, the spirit, and we would argue. I mean, you can argue that the church is more vibrant in a lot of ways in places that don't have those features and don't have those amenities and don't have those resources. And so it's just interesting. I think that the consumeristic nature, that's one of the concerns that I think.
I'd have to ask you, because Ramon, you mentioned something about the church becoming Disneyland. So I want you to go into that a little bit. But I do think it's going to take you back to the question of like, what do we understand the church to be, and what is this gathering for? So it is going to pull you to that question one way or another. But again, we were talking offline when we were first getting set up. V and you were talking about, like what happens when the church becomes Disneyland, right? And
hey, real quick,
and all of that.
Before we get to Disney World and Disneyland, I just want to say something real quick. If you look at Disney World, WOR, you see like the initials for Orlando is in the world.
Oh yeah, and land.
And then you see Disneyland, LA.
Was that purpose?
I don't know. That was like I saw that recently, and I was like, "Yo, that's crazy!" I never realized that because Disney World is in Orlando, and Disneyland is in California.
John, you so funny, man. Hey, y'all pray.
I think they did that for branding and marketing purposes.
I mean, the larger question here, or the larger sort of observation is, I mean, obviously worship services production speaks to this larger sense of the church as sort of a commodity. You talk about church as business, right?
Yeah, the business of church.
The business of church. And when you said the business of church, I thought like, what's the thing that's most similar to what it seems churches are doing?
I don't know if anyone's, how they put out those surveys and I think I just saw something that was like, some industry is now, I think the health and wellness industry is now a $300 trillion industry.
I believe it.
I think is what they said. And I was like,
Health and wellness.
Health and wellness. Yeah, so everything from gyms to whatever. Like I think they probably lump in a whole bunch of things in there. But I don't know if I'm wondering if somebody has put out a stat on like the industry of church. I'd be interested to know what that industry is. Well, I think people go there and are like, oh yeah, well if you do, because they've got the stats on like, oh you need the giving base to be this, you get this many people, and
so Disneyland,
all that stuff.
So Disneyland is just immensely intriguing to me. I learn from them every time I'm there because I think they're at the top in terms of producing an experience. Like you walk through those gates and you feel like you're in another world, right? And I've never been in a place that is, I mean, every detail is covered and considered. There's a reason why it's spotless, right? I really know stuff like that, like where, different places, how clean it actually is, right? And Disneyland, it's almost, you don't see anything anywhere. The instant there's garbage in the ground, it's picked up. The experience of going to the different sort of areas of Disneyland, the rides that are there, the way in which they time.
Is this Disneyland or Disney World?
Disneyland.
Okay.
And so, I mean, I think Disney World is similar, but Disneyland is my most recent experience.
Got it.
I would argue, obviously run by the same company, both I think are trying to do the same thing. The way in which certain characters appear at different moments. I've read about how they train the different characters, the people pretending to be Snow White or et cetera. They're not pretending, you are that person, right? And the way in which they intentionally sort of engage different people in the family. All of that produces this sort of experience where, I remember when Maya was young, I think it was Maya, she asked me, is this real? And I said, when we're here, it is real, right? Like, yes, that is Minnie Mouse, right? Yes, that is Donald Duck, right? Yes, that's Mickey Mouse. And so, and I've read this, churches sort of, they're for some churches, I think they're very intentionally. Other churches, maybe not so much intentionally, but certainly that sense of like, I want you to come here and experience something. And we sort of put the spiritual sort of thing around otherworldly, right? And all the different details are covered to do that. To your point, I mean, to the degree in which I think we're using means and trying to do the best that we can so that people have the best sort of experience, the best opportunity to have experience with the Lord. Amen. I think the problem is the degree in which we sort of mistake that for being the real thing. In other words, I think the problem is when we sort of say, hey, if I went to Disneyland and say, well, yeah, I'm experiencing real community here. No, I'm not. right? I'm experiencing something temporarily, right? But I don't have relationships with the people here, right?
Yeah.
If like,
And you're not really experiencing anything that happened in the movie. So like if you go to Disneyland and say like, oh, I'm actually in, let's say I see something with Moana, I'm not actually in, sort of like Hawaii or any of the, but you're not actually on one of those islands. You're not actually on the water. You're not getting into any of those boats. You're not going into caves. And in that sense, it's like, that's not actually the real thing.
Yeah, so the problem is if, whatever emotions that you have, if they're not sort of them, when we sort of think the emotions or the stirrings and that's the Holy Spirit transforming you and we're done. Like, no, that's not it at all. Right. I would argue that let's have the different things that sort of help people set people up to then go deeper, right? And the deeper is the hard work of committing to a church, right? Being in the Word, having people hold you accountable,
like real growth, real formation, real maturity. Yeah. Like that's
the problem is like people are sort of skirting at the surface level. And it works for a while, but when that time of testing comes, like for example, a George Floyd protest, COVID, all these other things,
or just calling people out in their sin.
Yeah.
Or hard seasons. You lose your job.
Yeah.
Someone dies. You get sick. Like thing after thing after thing after thing happen in succession that aren't in your favor.
If your production,
then what happened? Yeah.
If your production is only this and there's nothing underneath it that sort of is tied to it. And I think that's the real thing that is a fear, is that people, because it's so powerful, people are willing to just sort of mistake that for and to say that's the thing. And when on the other side of it is, one of the things I've noticed is churches that sort of go heavy on this begin then to have all this sort of hypocrisy, right? Like you find out about the lives they live apart from the stage, and it's way different, right? Yeah. It doesn't match, right? Yeah. They're speaking about the glories of God and faithfulness, and yet they're not faithful in their lives. There's a certain pastor we all know where it seems to me like he is now just sort of caught in the cycle of always going bigger and better, right? So one worship service, they had rain coming down from the ceiling. The next one, he's got a whole stage set up with it looks like a mini house, right? I almost feel like he's got to come up with what's the next thing he's going to do. Whatever.
Hit him with the fire.
Yeah,
come on, hit him with the fire.
I mean, I think he's only a couple degrees short of like saying, hey, this Sunday I'm going to have a rocket ship on stage. I'm going to rocket up to the moon, right? And come
skydive.
back.
I think it's going to be skydive.
He's going to skydive. Yeah, I mean, it's just almost
from the top. You got to take the rooftop off. Jump, bungee jump.
Yeah,
I think parachute in is what it's going to be.
But yeah, like it's the tail wagging the dog, right? It's almost like it's so much about production. People are coming in. It's almost as if he can't do just a Sunday where like, hey, we're just gonna we'll have all the pieces together. We're just gonna have guitar, word, come together. You can't do that.
That right? would actually be interesting to like flip it that and just as a test to say like, hey, you know what? We're just gonna come in, strip it all down, and do this. We're gonna do a very Vine type service. We're going to put away the trellis.
Yeah.
But when the trellis becomes so large, the management of that trellis, you start to go, well, are we really trying to just manage the trellis? Or are we actually
and this gets back to what you said,
good growth in the vine?
That kind of production, if there's not depth behind it, if you sort of help people see like, sure, the production is just a doorway into actually something deeper, and we're going to press you into that. And if you're not willing to be pressed into that, you're going to not be satisfied here. What happens is then people's faith stays here, right? It stays consumeristic, superficial, frankly, and it becomes easily jostled, right? That's just that. I mean, just a parable about this. When if a production is only that inch deep, right? It's a parable of the sowers, right?
Yeah.
There's no roots behind it.
There's no root.
Come on.
And so then you easily, you're easily taken away from the faith.
When the cares of the world come, you get ripped out, and then you have chokes you out. You have very little growth.
And I would also that's good. I mean, that's good. That's a good like biblical passage to kind of go to even kind of give a landscape of what we have, the 4 different types of people.
What we're trying to do. Yeah.
We have those people.
And we should always be asking, the way we do church, what is it helping people have roots, or is it helping people?
Or is it just getting people excited?
Yes.
And then,
but here's the thing. I want to also add another layer to the conversation. Is the crazy part about this is as well is when you say that when people come in, and they if it's just the production and there's nothing behind it, sometimes churches attract people that just want
Yes.
the production.
Yeah, that's part
They
of this.
don't want anything deeper.
It's part of the strategy.
Like, they don't want anything deeper. They want to not be known. They want to just come in, be in the back,
Be anonymous.
get their fix, get their feel, get their
Get their church
whatever.
on.
And then the idea of building community and doing relationship, and they don't care about none of that.
Nobody got time for that.
Yeah.
None of that. Nobody got time for that. We just want to come and be able to be entertained. And then the same way you go to a comedy show,
Yeah.
you want to go, you pay your money, i.e., pay my tithes and offerings, pay my money, see Kevin Hart, whoever,
Get my return.
get my return on investment, I guess, and be entertained for my hour, 45-minute, whatever he stand up he does. And then I don't build relationships with the people that are in the comedy show.
Yeah, and that's
I leave.
and this becomes
And that's what people do for church.
I mean, you brought up something that's, I think, a good way to think about this is we've been sort of thinking about this experience where then people have this sense of like, oh, I enjoy this, I like this. Worship service shouldn't always just be comfortable, right? Or entertaining.
That's right.
If you sort of look at a holistic sense of this, you should have some worship service that make you uncomfortable, that unsettle you, right? That make you sort of that make you feel like, oh, I don't like how this feel, but it's real, it's authentic, it's pressing into something deep. And I think that's the big problem. If really you only want people to leave if your goal is every single time people leave the worship service, every time people sort of experience our church, it's always sort of happy clappy entertainment. Like I laughed, I cried, right? And I go on living my day however I want to.
Yeah.
Then that's not church, really. In a way, the Bible talks about church, family, body,
Maturity.
Exactly. I mean, what you're sort of alluding to here is that sense in which, and I think that's the testing. If like you sort of leave your church because sometimes it does make you uncomfortable or unsettle you, or make you realize, oh wow, like I do discriminate, right? Or I do have these biases, or wow, yeah, here's this huge struggle I have with porn, or the ways in which I treat my spouse or my kids, and this church won't let me. It keeps being uncovered, and I have to deal with it. I want to ignore it. Oh, throughout the week I'm ignoring it, but the church has sort of pressed me into this. That's what a church should do. And
It's called conviction.
yeah, exactly.
It's called
Yes,
it's called
that's
the Holy
great.
Spirit is convicting.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem if you lean too far into production, is that you lose the sense of conviction, because conviction is unsettling, and you're calling people to step into an area that they initially won't like, but ultimately that's the only way transformation happens.
And lastly, too, before we kind of wrap up with this, I just want to say everything that I think has been said is valid and right. Just want to just slice out a portion of it is every church service should not just simply be beat you down with the Bible. It should not be that. It should be, you're supposed to have your phone on Do Not Disturb.
It was on.
It shouldn't be, just conviction, and just beat you down with the Bible. It shouldn't be that. There is an aspect that there should be some celebratory aspect of what God has done. People have gone through a lot of trauma, a lot of issues. Some of them have had crazy weeks. Some of them have had cancer. Some of them, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes on. So I don't want people to take away from this. Just be beat down with the Bible, and that's not what we're saying at all.
Well, that the music experience can't be like lit.
But there is an aspect to the celebratory nature of what God has done in our lives, His faithfulness. I mean, that's when you think about the legacy and the history of the African American church, like them going to church because of all week they've been beat down. They had to celebrate. They had to have a place to celebrate and stuff like that. So I just don't want people to hear and take away that.
Yeah.
Our church shouldn't do that, but it can't only merely
here's what I would supplement that. I would supplement that just with the idea that, again, you got to think, and here's the whole thing that gets behind the industry or business of church. There's a lot of money that gets invested or put or expended on this.
Always comes back to the money.
Production level. So you ask, like, how much money is Beyonce, like when we talk about those Netflix specials or whatever, what kind of trucks are they backing up to support, these experiences that they're creating? The lights, the camera, the LED walls. Like, I mean, LED walls that are $250,000 just to put a wall up.
They nice though.
They're nice. They are nice, but I'm saying like that's just a wall.
Sure.
The LED wall by itself is $250,000. Then you haven't talked about stage, cabling, cameras, the people demand all that. I mean, all of those things. The $250,000 is like a lot of salaries, depending on the church that you're at, right? Yep. And so I know churches that give other churches money for stuff like that, just for the production of things. And so when you think to that degree, I understand like there's a sense of, oh, well, maybe that is an access point to then go to something deeper. At the same time, do we become slaves of our subculture to the degree that we're trying to create this such a strong draw to produce some kind of attraction or enticement, to hear something from God because it looks so pretty, but then we're actually sort of trapping people in this sort of like surface level purgatory experience of faith. Wow. When in reality, there is no planting happening. It's just excitement. Yeah. And then as soon as the cares of the world come up, they're choked out. They've got no maturity. New election season comes up, or someone gets brutalized in the streets, or some policy change or whatever. And then you're back to, Twitter fingers and all of that stuff because there's been no real growth. And so I think there's at least a challenge, just like Paul is always talking about athletes and training and looking at all those things and exercising discipline and all those things, to say like, as we're trying to build all these things, serve God's people, shepherd the people of God, all of that, I understand we're in 2025 and there's all this technology and I get it. We're sitting here, we got 4 cameras in the room and lights and all of it so that we could sort of extend the message right past just that 35 minutes on Sunday. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely a need for, but at the same time, trying to remind ourselves who are in these sort of, content creation and media spaces to remember that like there's also something we got to fight against. That's to make sure that people, when they come into these spaces, remember what they're here for. Mm-hmm. So I think it's always going to keep coming back to like, how are we defining church and what is church for? Maybe that's a part 2.
That's a part 2.
But definitely I think we're going to have to keep pulling back.
Excellent, man. Good. Great conversation today, fellas. This was great. As always, we want to tell y'all, especially in this new year, to like, share, and comment. And we would love to hear what you have to say in regards to the business of church.
Yeah, some of y'all go to these churches, so like, put your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear them. So come.
Which one are you? Are you the?
Yo, come at me. So I'd love to have the conversation.
Well, like we always say, man, love God, love people. We are out. Peace.